I didn't go to Iraq to win hearts and minds. I went there to kill them, the bad guys. I went to terrorize the terrorists. I consider myself terrorizer, because I believe this is the most effective way to wage the war on terror. You can't negotiate with murderers and bandits. You just have to eliminate them. I was born in 1960s behind Iron Curtain in communist Poland. And this is the time that we all know how dangerous these communist systems were in Eastern Europe. So political prisoners, political murders, assassinations, censorship, that was norm. The fraudulent elections, that was norm. Intimidation by the state, intimidation of political opponents, intimidation of their families and their friends. And yes, I encountered that too, and eventually I was forced to leave Poland in 1980s after spending time in communist prison as a political prisoner.
What did you do that got you arrested, or what did they accuse you of doing that got you imprisoned?
What happened is in 1981, in December 1981, when there was the communist system was crumbling, the economy was in shambles, they decided to impose martial law. So on December 13, at midnight, they already had the lists of political opponents prepared like a year or years ahead. So that December 13, they arrested around 25, there are different estimates from 25 to 60,000 people. So basically secret police, military, and police, uniformed police were raiding citizens' homes and arresting them, pulling them out. Sometimes the children were left in the house, in the apartments, with no supervision because the parents were detained, arrested. So that's where I start to get engaged even more in the opposition. This is where me and friends of mine were printing underground, we call it underground, it was just bulletin. We call it newspaper, but it was basically a leaflet with 2 pages, just telling people what is really going on, collecting information, who is getting arrested, and they try to disseminate to people so people know what's happening. And the information is the most dangerous thing to totalitarian socialist system. So we were very promptly, I think, tracked down and arrested. That's how I ended up with a 3 years prison sentence and sent to the harshest Polish prison at the time, to Hrubieszów, very infamous prison, where I spent my time as a political prisoner.
Now you came to America in 1984, you said. 5 years later, you see the Iron Curtain come down.
Yes, never expected.
From a distance. What was that moment like when you saw that Poland was free?
At this time, in 1991, I became U.S. citizen. This is, I think, the greatest moment in my life. And when I was watching the Iron Curtain crumbling, when I was watching the communists being kicked out of the governments, that was like a pretty, it was a relief for me, because I know that these systems will never threaten, free people will never threaten America again. So that was like a good feeling.
All right, so let's move to 1991. You said the best moment of your life, you became an American citizen.
Yes, I became American citizen, and this is something that is, again, there's like moments in my life that sometimes bring tears to my eyes. So I became American citizens, but also at the time, America was fighting a war, First Persian War. So there was my moral obligation to support my country, my America, the best I can. And for me, the most effective way to do so was to join military. So I decided to pick a rifle and fight the war on behalf of America. And my American on behalf of my fellow American citizens. This is how my adventure, I would say, with military started. Though my intention was never to stay in military 20 years like I did. And for me, my first idea was America is fighting war. I want to be one of them one of the military personnel supporting America and fighting that war on behalf of America. But after the war, since by this time I had a really sad life, great life in America, my intention was to come back to my normal life, and well, it happened, I never did. I stayed in military for 20 years in the U.S. Navy. I'm very proud of it.
And we're very grateful for it. When you joined the Navy, did you already know you wanted to become a SEAL?
Well, I didn't know what the SEALs were. That's not was. Eventually, I learned that there is a unit called Navy SEALs, but my intention was to join military and serve wherever America needs me. That was not my intention just to go and be a Navy SEAL. Eventually, when I learned more about Navy SEALs, yes, I wanted to serve within Navy SEAL teams, and eventually I made it. I became Navy SEAL, and I fought the.
When did you go to BUDS training?
My class was 185 in 1993. 1992, I was already 32 years old, so I was 4 years over the age limit. But I'm so grateful to this nation that actually that gave me the waiver, and I was able to actually attend the selection BUDS. Eventually, I became instructor there at the end of my career.
Tell me what BUDS training was like as a man who was older than the typical BUDS trainee. So what did you expect it to be, and what was it really like?
Well, what I expected to be is a little bit different than the reality was. I expected to be, I was thinking at the time that since those are special forces, I would be locked up for an entire 6 months somewhere on base, and I will be training. Well, I told myself I spent almost 2 years in communist prison, so that couldn't be that bad. Well, it turned out to be that the training is actually training and selection, that you are not confined to base or to some kind of prison environment, that you are working during the day at night time, wherever that do the training that needs to be done, but then you are free to go to your either apartment on town or go to your barracks. So that was a big surprise for me. And but the other aspects were a little bit more difficult because I was older, and I was in selection with people 18, 20, 21 years old. So no matter what beat up you get, by this, when you are that young, you just recover the next day and can good to go. For me, it was a little bit more difficult. So when my friends, call them teammates in BUDS, left party after the work day or on the weekend, I was recovering in bed with Bengay all over my body, trying to survive the next day. So I think that was the big challenge for me. As far as the stress is concerned, it really didn't faze me. There was nothing there that I expect to be very harsh. I expected very harsh treatment. So there was nothing surprise to me, nothing fazed me out, fazed me that of this kind. So that was part that was a little bit easier.
Well, you said 1993, you got your Trident,
yes.
Right? Okay, and what happened next?
So I was assigned to, initially to SEAL Team 2, and at that time the process of becoming a SEAL was a little bit different than it is today. Today, you go to the BUDS selection, then you go to jump school, Army jump school, go to SQT, and then you go, or vice versa, or in different order, but so it's BUDS, SQT, jump school, and then you're assigned to SEAL team. When you graduate from SQT, SEAL qualification training, you have a Trident, you are full-fledged SEAL with little experience, but you are considered a SEAL. You get 5326 NEC assigned to you. But at my time, that was a little bit different because you had to go, you were assigned to SEAL Team 2, you have to go to that time was STT, what they call it, the SEAL Tactical Training, versus SEAL Qualification Training as today. After a SEAL Tactical Training, you were assigned to SEAL Platoon on probationary period. And then they, after passing the board in front of the chiefs, master chiefs and officers, you were then, after successfully passing that probationary period, you were assigned the SEAL insignia and the 5326 NEC. So there's not only enough to graduate all the courses, but you have to prove yourself in the SEAL team that yes, you are the man these people, these experienced SEALs want to work with. And then you are assigned the SEAL team. That was my road to become a SEAL.
How did your fellow SEAL team members accept you as an older SEAL? Was it just once you're a SEAL, you're a brother?
Well, once you're a SEAL, you're a brother. If you are a new guy, so you are not that quiet, so brother yet. Well, it is, but your place in the SEAL platoon is not very. You are still a new SEAL. Everybody knows there is so much things to learn, and that process is fairly long. So until the first deployment, when you deploy overseas with SEAL platoon, you are still a new guy, and they call you basically new guy, FNG. I want to say that word here.
I know what that means.
Right. So that was my way. But eventually, you prove yourself, and then you like there is no difference. In my case, because my accent and my age, those may be a little bit odd, but I was always I always have the support of my fellow teammates. I was never treated differently. For them, it was, and that's what we learn all in the U.S. Navy. We are all the same. We are just Americans. We have the same color, red, white, and blue. That's all we need to be concerned. We look in our hearts. We don't look how you look outside. As you do your job right, you perform, you are a good SEAL.
That's fantastic. Talk about the bond that forms when you spend all this time together.
Well, this is something that is very unique. Every community that is so tightly knitted will have this bond or similar bond. But with the SEAL teams, please remember that every day, whether it's combat or in training, we do something that can kill us. And that's create a very unique bond, especially within the SEAL teams. So we become like a brotherhood. We don't call each other, hey, Navy SEAL so we call each other, hey, brother. So this is brotherhood. But we also realize that brotherhood of Navy SEALs is encompassed by the bigger brotherhood, the brotherhood of our military, our veterans. And that brotherhood is encompassed with the greatest brotherhood, the American brotherhood, American citizens brotherhood. So
that's fantastic. Where were you first deployed? This is the mid-90s, so we're not to 9/11 yet. So what kind of operations and locations were you?
My first deployment was to Bosnia, not to Bosnia, was to Italy. It was at the time that one of our pilots was shot down over Bosnia. So this is where one of our missions was to go and find him. And not only our unit was looking and supporting the operation of recovering him, but I think entire military was trying to find and save this our pilot. So yes, we were flying over Adriatic quite often and waiting for a call. That didn't happen. Actually, another unit was able to rescue our pilot, and but I'm proud I participated in it.
Oh, of course, of course. Where were you on 9/11, and what do you remember about that day?
A very tragic day, and I remember like today. I was in the SEAL team too, in the gym. We're working out, and I remember one of our teammates came in the gym, say, "Hey, there's an airplane that hit one of the towers," and it was like, well, some inexperienced pilot in small airplane got lost, and very tragic. But well, let's go back to work out. And then we hear there was a big airplane. There was a jetliner. So at that time we stopped what we were doing. I think we went to quarterdeck where was a big TV, and we started watching it. And actually, I seen the second plane hitting the tower. So we knew we'll deploy. We'll be used. We'll go after these bastards.
How did that change your training? How did that change your mission as a SEAL team? And when did you find out where and when you were being deployed?
At that time, there was another coast deployed to war. When the war started, I was on the East Coast, and we were actually deployed to South America and Central America. When the call came in for me specifically that I need to pack my stuff and go to Baghdad to help coordinate our missions with Polish special forces that were GROM, that they were working with us in Baghdad. I'm Polish speaker, I can speak Polish, Russian, and Japanese. So with this, I was tasked to help coordinate and facilitate Polish special forces GROM within our missions. And this is where we start working with them very closely, and to the point that we're doing missions together, the same missions. My primary job in SEAL teams was always breacher, so my expertise is our explosives. My expertise is just being able to gain access to target, to an object, to my SEAL platoon, my SEAL team. So that was my job.
And so when it comes to breaching, you developed a method to reduce and limit casualties of non-combatants. So
yes.
I don't know how much detail you can give, but how is breaching generally done, and how did you adjust it?
So what happened in Iraq, we were going after the hardened targets, often people who are, the terrorists didn't have a problem hiding themselves behind children and women, so that initial explosion actually stuns them, allows us to enter it and eliminate the threats. But we also knew that the women and children are on target. Most of the time, most of the targets that we hit were with women and children and the terrorists hiding behind them. So we didn't really have much option, because the explosives that we use, the way that we use these explosives, they were indiscriminately throwing the fragments and fragmentations of the door, wall, ceiling, or floor, and depends which way we are going inside, and could potentially injure women and children. So I had to devise a method of entry that would not throw that many fragments inside, but also it allow us shorter standoff from the explosion, so quicker access to the target. I don't want to go into details how the charge worked and what the charge was. That's irrelevant. But yes, I was very instrumental in developing also different tactics that allow us to be more effective assaulting targets with terrorists.
What if they somehow knew you were coming? Did that ever happen? And how did you deal with that if they were ready to defend themselves?
Well, like Spartans 2,000 years ago used to say, you wage the war for maybe 3 years. After 3 years, you are teaching your enemy. And of course, we've seen them too. We've seen them responding to our actions and trying to counteract it. They were never effective because we are extremely well trained and we are extremely effective. So they had no chance. But yes, we can see the countermeasure they tried to take and try to do harm to us, but it didn't work. But please remember too that I didn't go to Iraq to win hearts and minds. I went there to kill them, the bad guys. I went to terrorize the terrorists. I consider myself terrorizer, because I believe this is the most effective way to wage the war on terror. You can't negotiate with murderers and bandits. You just have to eliminate them.
What did that involve besides what we've already talked about, the breaching and the taking into custody?
Well, I would say we're inviting the terrorists to prison. If they didn't listen, we just eliminated them. But if they were able to apprehend them, we prefer to apprehend them because the information that we can gain eliminate more and more of these terrorists. So we tried to apprehend them, but we couldn't. We just eliminate them.
Did they talk much when you had them in custody?
Oh, the terrorists?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, they like to talk. They will sell their own mother, father, grandfather, anybody just to save their skin. But they were very talkative. Although usually on target, they tend to pretend they don't speak English. No English. So this is where I devised so-called Drago Accelerated English Course for Terrorists. You give me 10 minutes with a terrorist, and through persuasion and very nice treatment, I guarantee he will be speaking English. Sometimes the effects were so amazing, they were speaking with better accent than I can say it. So that's...
Did your tactics become standard procedure?
Not these tactics, with being super nice to a terrorist and kind of convince him to speak English. That is just my things that I maybe will patent one day, but no, that was my trade secret.
Did anything surprise you about being at war?
Not really, because everything that I've seen in the war, I might say a different way. I haven't seen anything in the war that Navy did not prepare me to see. I didn't do anything in the war that Navy did not prepare me to do. So it was like, well, old machine that yeah.
Were there moments where you thought to yourself, that's why they had us do this in training, so we could be ready for something like this?
Yes, there were moments like this too. There's almost like revelation. Okay, now I understand. But also I remember when I left the war zone, when I became SEAL instructor, and in that selection, in famous or infamous, however, depends how you look at it, selection, I apply some of these lessons that I learned to make our students better, to prepare them better for combat, to prepare them to be a better SEAL. So I'm very proud of it.
How many deployments did you have in Iraq?
I did 3 deployments back to back, 2003, 2004, 2005.
Well, 20 years in the United States Navy, most of that time as a Navy SEAL, but now nearly 40 years living in America and more than 30 years as an American citizen. So what's your message about why you appreciate America and why the rest of us should too?
And I will use this opportunity here to thank American people for my freedom. I never had a chance to do it on the bigger scale, so now I would like to use it and say thank you for my freedom. But also there I would like to point something out. See, America was built on goodness, on personal freedom. It is so ingrained in American people that they just don't see it. It's so transparent to them. This is the way they are. They are just good people because they were brought up to be good people, good citizens, and they don't think much about it. But what I would ask is take a step back and look. When I look from outside, I see beautiful country run by beautiful, awesome people who cherish their freedoms, cherish their America, cherish their country. Take a step back and look at America. Look how beautiful, unique, and special country it is. And this is my view of America. I'm proud to be a Navy SEAL, but you don't see me wearing this little trident here, like most of the people, our SEALs, many SEAls do, and righteously, so they deserved it. They earned that honor to wear the trident. But I wear only American flag because American flag encompasses everything that is good, encompasses the Navy SEAL trident as well. And also when I want people to see me not as a Navy SEAL, I want them to see me as American. There is no hyphen in front of this American. I'm just an American. I'm proud American. That was the proudest thing. That was my biggest achievement in my life.
So I was born in Ohio, little town, kind of southeast of Columbus, Shockton, Ohio.
Okay, and there's a history of service in your family, correct?
There is, absolutely. So I grew up always wanting to be in the military, just hearing the stories. My grandfather had a very distinguished career in World War II. He was a B-24 pilot flying in the European theater. He flew all of his missions, even was shot down over Yugoslavia, and they crash landed the plane. And thankfully, it was winter, so they crash landed in the snow. Everybody survived, and then he led his crew. They evaded back to friendly lines to Italy, and he got the Distinguished Flying Cross for that mission. And then he 7 air medals over his combat career. Never got to meet him. Came home and died of a heart attack after the war. So, but then my dad followed suit. He went in the Army. I was the black sheep and joined the Navy. My brother was a Marine and my sister was Air Force.
Why the Navy?
Specifically for the SEAL teams.
Okay.
Growing up, I grew up in the age of G.I. Joe, like many young men, and just kind of became very intrigued and by the special operations side of the military, and initially looked at Army long-range recon patrols and Rangers and the Green Berets. And my dad had done some work with the SEALs in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and he said, hey, there's a group of guys out there, you know, they say their training's the hardest. They jump out of planes, they blow stuff up, everything's from the water, they swim. He said, you may want to look into that. And I did, about the age of 15, and I said, that's where I'm going.
What was that training like? We hear the stories all the time, but for someone who's actually been through it.
I mean, it's tough, you know, and it's neat because I've had the unique perspective of going through not only SEAL training, I went through Ranger school, and a lot of people always ask me, well, what's harder? SEAL training is just, it's brutally hard. There's no doubt about it. It's designed to be that way. As you get further away from it, though, you forget. I had the honor of going back about probably 5 or 6 years ago now and watching a class go through Hell Week, and it brought back a lot of memories. But, you know, I think the biggest thing that puts it in context is the statistics. So my class, I started with class 200, and we started with 148 students, and I didn't even graduate with my original class. I graduated in class 202, but 200 only graduated 19. So that was its, you know, loss ratio, sticking right around an average attrition rate of 75% for SEAL training.
Is there any point where you were close to
Yes.
tapping out?
Yeah. When I was going through Hell Week is one of the hardest blocks of training, many say in the U.S. military, some say in some of the world's militaries, but it's 1 week straight where you get very limited sleep. If you're lucky, you may get 2 or 3 hours of sleep for that entire week. Starts on Sunday, you go till Friday afternoon, early evening, and you're constantly wet, coated in sand, you're constantly moving, you're cold, and it is just hell. And I had been told that if I could make it to sunrise on Wednesday morning, it got easier. So I wrapped my head around that tidbit of information, and it was my lifeline that I hung on to. So the sun rose on Wednesday morning, and I was like, you know, I'm telling buddies, hey, it's all downhill from here. You know, we made it, except we had not. Thursday night was my hardest night of Hell Week. The temperature in San Diego dropped that night down into the high 40s. My boat crew was losing every single race, and when you lose, you're punished for it through, you know, unique, you know, extra exercises or extra moments, freezing in the cold surf, and that's exactly what was happening. And I kept thinking back, you know, this is BS. You know, Wednesday morning came and went. It's supposed to be easier, and it wasn't. For a few moments, I thought about quitting. And but I told myself, look, if you quit, you know, this goal is done. So it kept me in there, and I pushed through to the other side and finished Hell Week.
What was the feeling when you finished?
Amazing. It is amazing. You're so tired, though. It is a fatigue. The only time I've ever felt a fatigue that heavy, and even more so, was when I was shot and bleeding out. You know, you're so tired, you can't even think straight. And you're so cold that that's all you could think about. So the biggest thing I remember about post-Hell Week was once we finally were secured, we had a community shower that was probably about 10 feet wide and about 15 feet long. And there was probably, 10 shower heads that lined the walls. And I took one of the metal chairs out of my room and put it right in the center of the shower, and I turned on all the shower heads on hot, and I just sat in the shower and slept in there for at least a couple of hours before I went to bed. That's the biggest thing I remember after Hell Week.
Finally got to warm up a little bit.
Yeah.
Man. So after all of this, where were you assigned pre-9/11?
So pre 9/11, I was an East Coast SEAL my entire career. My first SEAL team was SEAL Team 4. And at that time, the United States was heavily involved in the drug war. So we were really working hard to try and stem the flow of drugs coming out of South America. So a lot of the things that I did early in my career prior to 9/11 was jungle counter-drug related in Colombia, Peru, and working with our foreign counterparts, special forces and government agencies on things like that. Did a stint in training where I was teaching reconnaissance and surveillance, communications, things like that, where I moved into an area where I got recommended for a commission, picked up for a commission, and headed off to school.
So after 9/11, how does that change where you're deployed?
Well, it changed everything. I mean, literally, 9/11 changed everything. I mean, I don't know how much, I'm sure it impacted the military as a whole on the same level, but within the SEAL teams, it was a absolutely dynamic shift in everything. It shifted in the way we deployed. It shifted in the way we configured the SEAL teams. It shifted in our tactics. Up until 9/11, the SEAL teams, the last time the SEAL teams had seen heavy sustained combat was Vietnam. So many of the tactics that we were still teaching was from the Vietnam War. We were also using a lot of old Soviet doctrine, that obviously played in. But it was 9/11, we got into this very ambiguous, very heavy urban and close quarters combat, mountainous, long range desert combat. And it made us really take a look at, gosh, a lot of the things we're doing have changed. Like I said, the deployment cycle changed. Prior to 9/11, the SEAL teams were geographically specific to areas of the world. And after 9/11, the demand was so high on special operations forces that they reconfigured how the SEAL teams deployed, and every single SEAL team became worldwide deployable.
Afghanistan, you were there before you went to Iraq, correct? And what was, I don't know how much you can talk about it, but what type of missions and type of responsibilities were you taking on there?
The SEAL team's primary mission is probably our primary mission is direct action. Mm-hmm. So we are going after individuals, so find, fix, and finish the enemy. So whether we capture those individuals or whether we aid them on their way. And that's specifically what we were doing in Afghanistan. So we were doing what we call capture-kill missions. So operated different places in Afghanistan, and everything from individual target takedowns to sometimes long-range patrols where we were patrolling through valleys and dense areas up in the mountains where we knew there was heavy enemy activity, and we were looking for caves. We blew up a lot of caves. So those were some of the missions that we were doing in Afghanistan.
How would you describe the Taliban or whatever other groups you were fighting there? Were they competent? Did they provide challenges that you expected or didn't expect?
Yeah, they were definitely competent. I mean, they are people who have been at war for many years. I mean, they held off the Soviets, and you would be ignorant to think that they didn't know what they were doing. You had to fight them on their terrain, in their backyard, in an area that they knew very well, and in an area that they had used very effectively against the Soviet army. So you had to go in that, and you had to respect that heavily. They were very good at using the terrain, and we had to be very aware of that. So we recognized we had to maintain an extremely high level of fitness to be able to operate at these high altitudes and to be able to maneuver quickly in this really steep mountainous terrain. That was where they liked to fight.
How did you counter the home field advantage there? Well, how did you, if they know where all the mountain passages go and you don't, how do you overcome that?
Extensive intel collection, extensive understanding of terrain, extensive prepping the battlefield, if you will.
All right, let's talk about Iraq now. When did you go there?
I showed up in Iraq in the spring of 2007, which was right at the we were kind of into the height of the Anbar Awakening at that point. So the Anbar Awakening occurred in the fall of 2006, and I showed up in Fallujah, so we were operating all throughout Al-Anbar. Iraq was a really hard war. We saw a lot of progress in the beginning of the war, which I wasn't there then. I was in Afghanistan. And then it really stalled, and we got deep into this insurgency. Al-Qaeda, you had different tribes who were involved in fighting for different areas. So you had the Sunni Shia mix with Muqtada al-Sadr and Baghdad trying to hang on to their piece of the pie, and then Al-Qaeda, which is Sunni, was hanging on to their piece of the pie, much more so and heavily involved out in Al-Anbar. So the Iraqi people, for years, having been subjugated and, held under this tyrannical rule of Hussein, did not trust anyone, including us. And they made it very difficult for us to operate because they would not provide any information. And what happened with the Anbar Awakening is in 2006, finally the tribal sheikhs came together and said, okay, Al-Qaeda and the insurgency is killing far more of our people than, the Americans in this war is. They've been here for a while. They keep telling us they want to help us. They have done some good things, so let's help them. And that was really the turning point in the war for us in Iraq. It really started providing information, actionable information, that we suddenly really started to turn the tide, where we were able to, with pinpoint accuracy, go after mid-level and high-level leaders and take them out or capture them. And so it was really active. I mean, that deployment that I did in Iraq in 2007 was, I like to say everything I ever trained to do as a SEAL. I mean, we were operating almost every night, very kinetic operations, going in after very bad people, and like I said, either wrapping them up or aiding them on their way.
What happened the day you were shot?
We were taking down a target. It was the end of the deployment, and we were going into an area, Karma, Iraq, which is northeast of Fallujah. And Karma, Fallujah was really a battleground holding point for Al-Qaeda. And they had fought for it in 2004, obviously, and then again in 2006. And then the 2006 battle really kind of pushed Al-Qaeda out of most of Fallujah, and they moved up into Karma. And the Marines had an outpost in Karma, and they tried to be as active as they could, but it ebbed and flowed depending on the units that were operating in that area at the time. So when we got there, we came to find out that not many units had been out in rural Karma, and that we were told there was a lot of activity. So the very first deployment that our troop went into Karma, I wasn't on that mission. It was a huge firefight they got into, and Petty Officer Clark Schwedler was killed, SEAL. We had multiple guys wounded, and we knew that this was the area we needed to be in. So we just started going into Karma and developing more information about Karma throughout that deployment. So fast forward to the end of the deployment, we had been in multiple firefights in Karma. We had been tracking the #1 leader for all of Al-Qaeda for the Anbar province in this area of Karma. And we got word that he was going to be in a specific time and location, time-sensitive target for us. And we launched on that mission, fully expecting heavy resistance. We entered the target and nothing, as often happens in combat and with intelligence, it can be dated. And we went into this building, and there was a lot of activity. It looked like people had been there recently, but nothing was there. So we stood down. We found a lot of bomb-making equipment. We found munitions. So we found a lot of activity indicating, this was definitely part of the insurgency or Al-Qaeda. So we were going to blow that up, and we were going to head out for the night. And our snipers saw some individuals flee from a house about 150 yards away. And they ran across the road and went into about 5 individuals into a thicket, some thick brush. And the ground force commander came up to me and said, hey, I want you to take your team. Let's go up there. Let's find out who these guys are. Let's question them. Because it was 3 a.m. in the morning. Iraq had a curfew at the time. Most individuals, when they heard helicopters, explosions, anything like that, they stayed away from it. The only people that came to it were the individuals looking for a fight. We saw these individuals run to hide, so we thought, okay, they're trying to hide. There may be something to this. Maneuvered my team around, and long story short, we walked right into a very well-executed al-Qaeda ambush. What we found out later was the leader had left the building that we initially took down, moved to this other house about 150 yards away, and the 5 individuals that came out were the last part of his very well-trained security detail. And they had pre-staged an ambush line in that thicket, with the idea thinking that we may drive up to the house to take it down, or we would land our helicopters in the field across from this thicket. Instead, we basically walked right into the kill zone where they were, which started a very effective ambush, hitting my medic, hitting me at least 8 times that we know of, and hitting one of our other guys who managed to run forward and save our medic. The only point of cover we had, it was nothing but thousands of yards of empty desert. And the only point of cover we had was a large tractor tire, like a John Deere tractor tire. So my team fell back to that. I was still out front at that point, and I had already been shot multiple times across the body. I had taken 2 rounds in the left arm, which at that point I thought my arm had been shot off. And I was pinned down by multiple machine guns, and I was continuing to try and shoot, got up to move and try and get back to the tire when I caught a round in the face. Impacted the right side, traveled through my face, exited the right side of my nose, took out my right cheekbone, took off most of my nose, vaporized the orbital floor, broke all the bones above the eye, destroyed the head of my jaw, and shattered my jaw down to my chin and knocked me out. So guys saw me fall unconscious, thought I was dead, continued to fight, requested a fire mission, but we were so close to the enemy that had us pinned down that we were well within the danger close parameters. The rounds would have killed us, is basically what the aircraft overhead. We had an Air Force AC-130 gunship overhead. Continued to fight. I came to at some point and woke up and literally was watching rounds travel directly over me. Thankfully had enough wherewithal to not sit up, and enough wherewithal to realize that there was nothing I could do until my teammates won the fight. So I waited. In a lull and fire, I called out to my team leader and asked him how long till the medevac, and he told me, it's going to be just a few minutes, which was a lie. So, and I ping him on that. But they continued to fight. They continued to try and pin the enemy down. They requested the fire mission again, and the gunship said, no, we can't do it. You guys got to figure out a way to fall back. He called back and said, there's no way. There's no place to go. It's nothing but open desert. We have 1 point of cover, and we're making our stand here. So continued to fight, and finally he called back 3rd time and said, hey, look, we're running out of ammo. It had been probably about 30 minutes at this point. And he said, hey, running out of ammo. I got 3 severely injured, 1, potential KIA. He said that, if you don't bring in this fire mission, nobody's going to be left. So finally they relented and they agreed. He told them exactly how to do it, and it was pretty amazing. He called out to me and said, incoming. And I literally, you could hear the rounds go off and impact the ground in front of us, and the explosion blew up over us. So multiple 40 millimeter rounds. The machine gun that had me pinned down was hit in either that first initial volley or the second one, but I'll never forget that the gunfire stopped and the enemy fighter was crying out. He was in pain. He'd been hit pretty badly, and he was calling out to Allah. And I remember thinking to myself, stand by, because he's coming. And sure enough, they brought in the next fire mission, and that eliminated him. During that point, my team leader ran forward and grabbed me and dragged me back to the tire. He got a tourniquet on my arm, so he saved my life. And a few more fire missions were brought in, which finally neutralized the enemy, and we finally were able to bring in the medevac. Estimate 35 to 40 minutes from the time of initial impact. The medevac was on standby, which literally, I have to credit that to saving our lives. I read in Secretary Gates' book how much they really pushed to strategically place our medevac assets in strategic locations on standby based off operations that were going on in the theater during those nighttime to enable the greatest success for us that had been wounded to get to the combat support hospital within that golden hour. And it absolutely happened for me. I mean, they picked us up and they flew the rotors off that helicopter to get us to Baghdad. And I think I got into the OR probably right close to that hour mark with nothing left. And that medical team saved my life.
At what point did you understand fully just how serious the injuries were?
Pretty quickly. Pretty quickly. I knew that I couldn't get my tourniquet on. I knew I was losing a lot of blood. And I tell people, I knew I was dying. I mean, I had learned enough about medical trauma. We're trained in battlefield trauma, and I knew enough that I was going into shock, and I was going into hypovolemic shock from the loss of blood. And what was happening is I could feel my body was trying to save itself. I was getting cold in my extremities. I was losing feeling and the ability to move in the extremities because my body was trying to pull stuff into my core to keep me alive. And it just got harder and harder to breathe. It got harder and harder to think. Every breath, I felt like I was running, at full sprint. And I was like, you're going to die here. I said a prayer, and a thought popped into my head, and the thought was I had seen a show, Baghdad ER. And on that show, they talked about that if our wounded warriors showed up in the combat support hospital with a pulse, the military trauma professionals had a 90% chance of saving them. And that became my focus and my goal. So I just focused on stay awake to stay alive, stay awake to stay alive. And that was just kind of my mantra right up to the point that, they wheeled me in and the bright lights of the OR came on.
Clinging to that spot, it's like getting to Wednesday morning sunrise, only this time they were right.
They were right, yeah, thank God. Thank God. Although there is a funny story that happened in the operating room, a little bit of a Wednesday morning moment. Uh-huh. So I got into the operating room and I was like, okay, I made it, I can let go. They could, if I die right now, they'll bust out a crash cart, they can bring me back. But, I've got all the people here, they've got the tools, they've got the talent. And I was letting go and drifting off. And I felt this tug on my left side. And this nurse yells out, "He's still got a bomb on him." And when they took all my gear off, I used to carry a grenade on my belt. So they had removed all my gear, but they had missed this grenade. And they don't like explosives in the operating room. Doctors and nurses and all of them are not trained to deal with those things. So they are trained that if there are explosives, they clear the operating room. And they have somebody who's trained to get rid of it. So yeah, here I am, I'm dying. And he's got a bomb on him, and it looked like something out of a Looney Tunes cartoon, like Roadrunner, nothing but clouds of dust, and I'm in there alone, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, I'm dying. And I think the last thought I remember was, oh my God, what a bad day.
Obviously the surgery was successful.
Yes.
They stabilized you, got you home, and then a time later, you became famous for having a sign on your door at Walter Reed that said this: "Attention to all who enter here. If you are coming into this room with sorrow or to feel sorry for my wounds, go elsewhere. The wounds I received, I got in a job I love, doing it for people I love, supporting the freedom of a country I deeply love. I am incredibly tough and will make a full recovery. What is full? That is the absolute, utmost, physically my body has the ability to recover. Then I will push that about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you're about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, and intense, rapid regrowth. If you are not prepared for that, go elsewhere." Explain what inspired that and what happened once people saw that.
Yeah, so what inspired that was I had some individuals that came into the room that were expressing pity over the wounds that I had received, and just going ahead and writing me and other wounded warriors off that, what a tragedy. We send these young men and women off to war, and then they come home broken, and they're never going to be able to, realize their full potential or something along those lines. So when they left, my wife came back. I couldn't talk, wired shut, trach, stomach tube, the works. And I could only write on a notebook. And I wrote to her, I said, never again. Nobody is going to come into my room and feel sorry for me. I refused to feel sorry for myself, and I penned out that sign. And there wasn't a whole lot of thought that went into it. It was like just a stream of consciousness in the moment. And I told her to get the brightest piece of paper she could find and put it on the door. And I said, nobody's allowed in my room until they read this. And if they can't handle that, then tell them they're not allowed to come in. And a New York firefighter who I later became friends with took a picture of the sign and wrote a blog about it, and it went viral. It just went everywhere. And it took on a life of its own. So much so that President Bush invited me to the White House. My family and I got to meet him in the fall of 2008. But what's really neat about the sign, we donated the sign because I didn't feel like it was mine. So many people want to make this big deal. Oh, you're the guy that wrote the sign. But the sign, I speak so much about this idea of the overcome mindset. And the sign is the epitome of that mindset. And the overcome mindset is nothing but a choice. It is a choice to either quit or to keep driving forward. And in that moment, I chose to keep driving forward. And there's so many other wounded warriors that have done the same. So that's why I felt like it wasn't mine. It was ours. And, we had it framed with the current campaign medals and the Purple Heart, and it hangs at the Wounded Ward at Bethesda National Medical Center, continuing to motivate and inspire other wounded warriors. I talk to many who tell me that before a surgery, they touch it before they go into their surgery as they go by.
The movies like Navy SEALs had just come out. Books about SEALs in Vietnam had started coming out, and it was just fascinating. It was really cool technology. I wasn't allowed to own a gun growing up. I never hunted growing up. And so watching this stuff, though, as a young man on TV and reading these books, it was just fascinating to me. I think that was the catalyst of why I wanted to join the military. There is no way to describe what BUD/S is like. You are cold, wet, sandy, and miserable for 8 months to 9 months. And that's if you make it all the way through without getting injured or getting rolled back. We started off with 200 people plus in our class. We came out of Hell Week with a very large number of people. I think it was near like 90 people. And we graduated with only, I think, 23 or 24 original members of our class. So it was a 90% reduction. I happened to be one of those original members. So the psychological impacts and the physical impacts of that are second to none. I fractured my tailbone a couple days before Hell Week started, so I went through Hell Week with a fractured tailbone. I wasn't able to do sit-ups or anything like that. I was colder than I've ever been in my life, even despite the fact that it was towards the end of the summer when we were going through our training. And there were times when you have a come to Jesus moment and go, can you physically make it through this type of stuff? My biggest sense of pride and joy, I think, really came at the end of Hell Week, because that was the culmination of my entire upbringing of wanting to become a SEAL and knowing that was, at least in my mind, the hurdle that was going to have to, can you make it through Hell Week? It's 5.5 days. We had 3 hours of sleep. You run well over 100 miles with boats and telephone poles, and it's pure exhaustion. You don't sleep for the first 3 days. That right there it's really hard processing that. So there's a video that I still have, fortunately, back in the day when there was really no video because we didn't have cell phones, of the commanding officer coming over the berm, which is in Coronado, is where the base is, and with the American flag, and securing our Hell Week class on Friday morning. And after he got done saying your class is secured, something happened, and I'm the only person that did this, that just let out this roar. And the roar probably lasted 10 plus seconds, and the entire class is turning their heads, looking at me. And I was so proud in that moment, because I was a kid from small town America that had no insight into what the military was, and BUD/S is renowned for being the hardest training in the military. And I just accomplished something that I would say, outside of a handful of people in my life, nobody thought I could do. Nobody thought that that was possible. That for me was an immense sort of pride and accomplishment. Fast forward to the end of our graduation component, it was a sigh of relief. Thank God this has been a long time in the making, because you have an additional 7 months on the backside of that called SEAL qualification training. So it was nearly a year and a half of pure nonstop training. And it was a sigh of relief of going, okay, this part of my career is done. Now it's time to go to do the job for real, because we're in the middle of a war. And what does that bring? I got asked with a couple other of my teammates to move out to western Iraq near the Syria border called Rawa, and we helped stand up a base out there that was a Marine Corps base. What had happened on that deployment was the thing that was an action that changed the course of my life. Clark Schwedler, Petty Officer First Class Clark Schwedler, was doing a direct action mission outside of Fallujah when he was fatally wounded. And Clark was one of my very close friends and teammates. And that drove the catalyst for me wanting to try out for Naval Special Warfare Development Group, which is commonly referred to as SEAL Team 6. And in May of 2011, we conducted the Bin Laden raid, which I was blessed and fortunate enough to play ever so small a role in on that operation, and being part of that team. And then just a handful of months later, on August 6, 2011, we had the downing of Extortion 17. And the downing of Extortion 17 ended up becoming the greatest single loss of life in special operations history. We lost 30 Americans and a military working dog. And in an eerie nod to the call sign of that helicopter, we lost 17 SEALs. And so in an instant, a third of one of our units was lost. What ended up happening out of that was they had to reconstitute the loss of what was known as 2 Troop from Gold Squadron. And so they decided to pull individuals from other squadrons to reconstitute this lost troop. I had the honor and privilege of being one of those men, and I came over from Blue Squadron to make up the new 2 Troop. It was very significant because we talked about culture in the past, and every unit has its own little aspects of the way they conduct their business, and their culture is slightly different, even though we're all SEALs. And so it was the first time in the history of our entire organization where we had this immediate mixture of squadron personalities. And so everybody was wondering if we could rise to the occasion and be very integrative. That we became known as the new 2 Troop. And it was a year later that we deployed right back to the same place in Afghanistan in Fob Shank and started conducting combat operations in and around the same area, which was known as Tangi Valley. And Tangi Valley was, at the time, was the most dangerous place in all of Afghanistan. And it was the valley in which Extortion 17 was shot down just a year prior. Well, in early December, we started to get intelligence reporting that an American doctor had been taken captive. He was going over to do a Doctors Without Borders thing and had linked up with a few other Afghan doctors, and then come to find out they had turned on him, and then they turned him over to the Taliban, who then took him captive and was more than likely was going to use Dr. Joseph as a bargaining pawn to help, release some captive combatants that the U.S. had. Well, how our mission came about so quickly was we started to get intelligence reportings that he was going to get moved over to Pakistan. And typically when that happens, you're almost for sure going to lose contact with that person, and then the survival rate is going to drastically start decreasing as time goes on. And so our unit spun up on this target. We developed the intelligence picture as fast as possible, and on the night of December 8th, we launched out of our base and landed about 5 hours away and started patrolling into the target. Now, what we did differently, and it was again a nod back to our SEAL brethren in Vietnam and how they used to attack targets going through the Mekong Delta, the hardest way into the targets. We took on the same approach because the way our target building was positioned and where we thought the doctor was being held captive was in a compound that overlooked the entire valley. So there was no way to walk up the front, up the valley to the compound, because despite it being at night and with even low loom, once your eyes adjust, you can see across the valley, plain as day, especially with as many people as we had and trying to move those type of forces. But this compound was to the back, it was butted up right to the back, the bottom of a mountainside. And so we came up the backside to that mountain and then had to walk down the face of that mountain. What we didn't know was, because there's only so much you can get from looking at and doing route reconnaissance, was how steep it actually was. And there was points where our team was turned around bouldering down the side of the mountain and using our ladders to get down from level to level to level. There was no clear path to do that. And so it really cut into our time. When we all finally got down to the bottom of the mountain and we got to our set point, we started to hear calls of prayer throughout the valley, and off in the very distance, started to see the sun started to peak up, first light. And so we knew we were right on the cusp. No more time to waste. It was at that moment that Nick Check, our point man, started to lead out our patrol and started moving towards the target building, our area of responsibility. Now, we were there with our entire troop, and the compound had many buildings and many places that needed to be hit simultaneously. So our team started to fan out and started taking their areas of responsibility. Our specific team, Echo Team, which was being led out by Nick Check, moved to our target building, and that we had assessed is where the Dr. Joseph was being held. And so as we started to get closer to the building, one of the Taliban guards had come out of the door with his rifle, and Nick Check immediately engaged him, and that started the catalyst of us rapidly accelerating our prosecution of the target. Nick took shots at him and began sprinting and moved in such a fashion that by the time I had a chance to react and started to maneuver to gain some space between us in case I had to also shoot, he was already 6 to 8 feet ahead of me. It was an instantaneous shots on target to forward progression to the door to prosecute this building. When we got to the building, which was only 20 to 30 feet away at this time, the door, we encountered something we had never encountered before on all of the prior years of doing combat operations. It was wool blankets that were multi-layered and cemented into the door frame on opposing sides. And so shots had already been fired, and in a hostage rescue mission, we had to move because if they woke up and decided to execute the American hostage, it is mission failure, and we do not do what it is we're designed to do as a military unit. And one of our first mission essential task lists is to do hostage rescue. And so a couple of us hopped on these blankets to try to rip them out of the door seam, and they were cemented in so well they couldn't do it. And it was, even after a couple seconds, we heard our voice from our troop chief, who said, "Get the hell inside there. Let's go." You know, we were talking about matters of seconds here. There wasn't a long delay in time, but seconds were hours in this environment right now. And so as Nick started to weave his way through, there was more gunshots. You can't really see what was happening because you were having to push away multi-layers of blankets, these heavy wool, blankets. And it's very difficult too because it's getting hung up on your gear, your guns, your night vision, all that stuff. I moved in right behind Nick, and I had stepped over something or someone, moved into my area of responsibility, which was to the left. And as I came in and presented my weapon, I saw somebody that was about 20 feet away from me also starting to present a weapon towards me, and I was able to engage him and make some very clean shots in his head and dropped him right there. But it was a matter of just split seconds of him getting shots off on me versus the other way around. It was at that time that I noticed somebody scrambling across the floor that was moving towards those weapons, and by the time I was able to close with that person, I was able to lock them down on the ground, pinning them to the ground with my knees on their shoulders as I was adjusting my night vision to gain facial recognition. This entire time, this person is trying to reach for these weapons and grab something. And well, I didn't know if this was one of the hostages that was scared and was trying to move because there was no voices at this time. There was nothing was being called out. And it was roughly in that instance that we began to call out for Dr. Joseph, like somebody, is he in this room? Will he say it? And there was no response. And this is all happening in just matters of seconds, right? So after a few more of these call-outs to Dr. Joseph, I finally hear this voice, I'm over here. And it was not the person I was on top of, and it was a voice that was coming from my right-hand side. And so I made the decision to shoot the person that I was on top of, and whether it killed him or subdued him enough, I was able to then jump off of that person, and I leapt across the room and was able to jump on Dr. Joseph, because there's still shots are now flying throughout this room. And so I jumped on Dr. Joseph to protect him with my body armor. It just happened to be, by the grace of God, that one of the other Taliban was within arm's reach of me. And I was able to hold Dr. Joseph against me with body armor, and within arm's reach, I was able to reach over and pin that person against the wall by their throat. And fortunately, what that had done was just given enough time for the rest of the team to make it inside and eliminate that threat. And so once that threat was eliminated, we went through doing the standard protocol of, asking him if he was hurt, ask him if he could, walk, ask him if they had been booby trapped. He didn't know if they put a suicide vest on him or if there was a, grenade that was set up ready for the pin pulled. So we did with a coordination with our EOD, an explosives check on him, make sure he was okay, and then we started to move him. We moved Dr. Joseph outside. And as quickly as I just described what had happened in there, it was about how fast everything had happened. In just a matter of, I would say a few short minutes, we went from entering in the building to killing five of the terrorists and rescuing Dr. Joseph when we had moved Dr. Joseph outside because we were coming on really quickly for first light and we needed to get extracted, I had looked over and I saw that people were working on Nick. And so I had asked for a replacement to take over from security detail on Dr. Joseph, and I started going over and working on Nick and helping our Air Force pararescuemen, and started to do a head-to-toe assessment on Nick and begin to see what we could do to potentially save his life. After the helicopters landed, we quickly got on board and they took off, and for the next 40 minutes on our way back to Bagram, we treated Nick's wounds. We did interosseous or IO device IVs and started CPR on him, which we rotated through the entire flight. And it was at that time when we got to the cache, the military hospital on base, that the doctors, pronounced him dead on the scene. Unfortunately, Nick was succumbed to, he was shot in the head, and there was really not much we could do for him. But we knew if there was any chance we owed him that, to get him to a higher echelon of care to decide whether or not, it was for them to decide, the doctors, if there was anything more that we could do to save Nick's life. But that was the culmination of December 8th and how I ended up becoming a Medal of Honor recipient. That operation is at the top of the echelon of most decorated special operations missions there is. What came out of that, Nick Check became a Navy Cross recipient, as well as 3 other people on that operation, along with multiple Bronze Stars and things of that nature. But as I talked about in the past, and how I view being a recipient at the end of the day, and I'm just a holder of this medal, and while it's for my personal actions, it is really, they would never have been able, I would have never been able to do what I've done if it wasn't for my entire team as a whole and how we operated. Nick was an absolute warrior, and he was fearless. And he showed that night in his immediate actions and his aggression to go save an American doctor. And it really is an ode back to Clark Schwedler from 2007 to the men of Extortion 17, which is how I ended up on Gold Squadron, in their passing, and just a year prior in 2011, and then with Nick Check. So every time I pick up this medal, I think about those 3 tragic incidences and all the lives of the warriors that were lost, that went into me being there on that night, and then subsequently being awarded this medal. There is very much a responsibility when you are a holder of this medal, a recipient of this medal, that you have a duty and obligation to promote its values and to tell the citizens of this nation what this represents. This isn't winning a Grammy or a Super Bowl ring. This is about fighting for the ideals of our nation and what we stand for as Americans, as being a beacon of hope to the rest of the world. And what comes with, you don't get that for free. And you get that through blood, sweat, and tears of serving your country and going off into foreign lands and doing things that are just, frankly, they're not comprehensible to a good majority of people in our nation. And so there's a duty and responsibility to talk about why this medal is important and why those traits are important for our society as a whole. It's about sacrifice.